In the dim light of a bustling homeless shelter, a wealthy man freezes as his gaze falls on a young woman serving food. Her delicate features and a familiar scar on her wrist stop him in his tracks. His heart races. "Amelia?" he whispers, the name barely audible above the chatter. Could this woman, surrounded by hardship, really be the daughter he lost years ago? What unfolds next is a journey of redemption, heartbreak, and the unexpected bonds that can heal even the deepest wounds. Michael Reynolds was a man whose name symbolized success, ambition, and wealth. As the CEO of a cutting-edge tech conglomerate, Michael was revered across the globe. Yet, behind the curtain of wealth and prestige was a man consumed by regret, a father who lost his family to ambition. Years ago, Michael had a family, a loving wife, Sarah Reynolds, and a bright, curious daughter, Emily Reynolds. They were his world, though he often failed to show it. As Michael's career took off, he found himself consumed by his work. His days were a blur of meetings, mergers, and deals, while Sarah was left to shoulder the burden of raising Emily alone. Sarah was patient at first. She believed Michael when he said things would slow down, but the late nights at the office and missed family milestones became the norm. One evening, after Emily had fallen asleep waiting to share her latest school project with her dad, Sarah confronted Michael. "She waited for you, Michael," Sarah said, her voice trembling with disappointment. "She drew a picture of you in her presentation, but you couldn't even be bothered to come home." Michael sighed, his tone defensive. "Do you think this is easy for me? Everything I'm doing, it's for us, Sarah, for Emily's future." Sarah shook her head, her voice steady but filled with pain. "Emily doesn't need another mansion or a college fund the size of a small country. She needs her dad." That argument was the breaking point. The next morning, Sarah packed her things, leaving with Emily and a vow to give her daughter the stability she needed, even if it meant doing it alone. At first, Michael convinced himself it was just a cooling-off period. "They'll come back," he reassured himself. But weeks turned into months, and Sarah didn't return. For a while, Sarah and Emily thrived. They moved into a cozy townhouse, where Emily flourished under her mom's care. Sarah worked tirelessly, channeling her passion into a nonprofit that helped at-risk youth. But tragedy struck on a rainy winter night. While driving home from a community fundraiser, Sarah's car hit an icy patch, and the crash claimed her life. Emily, just 12 years old, was thrust into the foster care system. She learned quickly that the world didn't owe her kindness. Over the years, she bounced between homes, each one leaving her more jaded but also more determined. By the time she aged out of the system at 18, Emily had built a protective wall around her heart, trusting no one but herself. Emily reinvented herself as Emma Scott, a name she felt matched her fierce independence. She worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, eventually finding a sense of purpose at a homeless shelter. Helping others gave her life meaning, even if her own wounds remained unhealed. Meanwhile, Michael had spent years searching for Emily, desperate to reconnect with the daughter he abandoned. He hired private investigators and followed every lead, but each one ended in heartbreak. Michael's once grand mansion felt empty, and his wealth only magnified the void in his life. When Michael's company proposed partnering with a local shelter for a holiday charity event, he reluctantly agreed, viewing it as another PR stunt. Little did he know, this event would lead him to a revelation he never expected. As Michael entered the shelter's bustling dining hall, the hum of conversation and clatter of dishes surrounded him. He scanned the room, his gaze settling on a young woman handing out plates of food. Her posture, her expression, it all felt eerily familiar. Then he saw it, a small scar on her wrist, a mark that brought back a flood of memories. He remembered a sunny afternoon when Emily, just 7 years old, had fallen off her bike, leaving her with that scar. Michael's heart raced. "Emily," he whispered under his breath. The name felt strange yet sacred as it rolled off his tongue for the first time in years. The young woman turned, her guarded smile masking a lifetime of pain. Michael froze, unsure of what to do. For the first time in decades, he felt completely vulnerable. His journey to reclaim the family he lost was about to begin. Michael couldn't shake the image of the young woman at the shelter. That night, he lay awake in his massive but empty bedroom, his thoughts consumed by the possibility. Could it really be her? Could Emma Scott, the dedicated volunteer with quiet resilience, be Emily Reynolds? His Emily? The next day, Michael returned to the shelter under the pretense of donating supplies. He walked into the bustling dining hall, his eyes scanning every corner until they found her. Emma was laughing with another volunteer, her smile lighting up the room. Yet, Michael noticed the shadow in her eyes, a weight that hinted at struggles she had endured. Michael kept his distance, unsure of how to approach her. He decided to confide in Mrs. Henderson, the shelter's coordinator, who had been running the place for over a decade. "That girl," Michael said, pointing discreetly at Emma. "Do you know much about her?" Mrs. Henderson glanced at Emma and smiled warmly. "Emma? She's one of the best we've ever had here. She works harder than anyone, even though she's been through so much herself. She's helping people like her. It's inspiring, really." Michael's heart ached as Mrs. Henderson unknowingly painted a picture of Emily's resilience. He learned that Emma was beloved by everyone at the shelter, not just for her work ethic, but for her kindness and willingness to listen to others' pain. Meanwhile, Emma was completely unaware of Michael's presence or his connection to her past. Her days were consumed with running errands, organizing food drives, and mentoring Sophie, a homeless teenager who had recently arrived at the shelter. Sophie, just 16, was rebellious and mistrustful, reminding Emma of herself at that age. "I don't need your pity," Sophie snapped during one of their first conversations. Emma didn't flinch. She simply replied, "I'm not offering pity. I'm offering understanding. There's a difference." Over time, Emma's gentle persistence wore down Sophie's defenses. The teen began to open up, sharing stories of neglect and abandonment that mirrored Emma's own experiences. Michael, unable to stay away, visited the shelter more frequently. Each visit brought him closer to Emma, though he lacked the courage to reveal the truth. Instead, he channeled his feelings into action, offering to fund new programs at the shelter. His generosity quickly earned him the admiration of the staff. One evening, Emma noticed Michael handing Mrs. Henderson a check. Curious, she approached him after the conversation. "You've been coming here a lot," she said, her tone neutral but curious. "What's your story?" Michael hesitated, the weight of years of regret pressing down on him. "I've been looking for someone," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Did you find them?" "Not yet," he replied, his eyes searching hers for any sign of recognition. Emma didn't press further, sensing that his pain was real. She offered a polite smile before returning to her work, leaving Michael feeling both hopeful and defeated. As Michael wrestled with how to tell Emma the truth, fate intervened. While cleaning out a storage room, Emma stumbled upon an old photo album that Mrs. Henderson had been sorting for a community project. Flipping through the pages, Emma froze. There, among the faded photographs, was an image of a young girl with pigtails and a wide grin. Beside her stood a man with a confident smile, Michael Reynolds. Emma's hands trembled as she clutched the photo. Memories she had buried long ago came rushing back. Birthday parties, bedtime stories, and the day her father stopped coming home. The realization hit her like a wave. Michael wasn't just a kind stranger. He was her father. Conflicted, Emma decided to confront him. That evening, as Michael was preparing to leave the shelter, she approached him, clutching the photo in her hand. "Care to explain this?" she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Michael turned, his eyes widening as he saw the picture. For a moment, he couldn't speak, Emily, he finally whispered. Don't call me that, she snapped, tears welling in her eyes. You don't get to call me that. Not after you abandoned us. Michael's heart broke as he saw the pain in her eyes. I didn't abandon you, he said, his voice shaking. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I never stopped looking for you. Emma wasn't ready to forgive. Do you have any idea what my life was like after Mom died? Do you even care? I do care, Michael said desperately. I care more than you'll ever know. Please, let me explain. Emma didn't respond. She turned and walked away, leaving Michael standing in the empty dining hall, consumed by guilt and regret. The days that followed were tense. Michael continued visiting the shelter, but Emma avoided him at every turn. Sophie noticed the change in Emma's demeanor and finally asked, "What's going on?" "You've been acting weird." Emma hesitated before showing Sophie the photo. "That man," she said quietly, "is my father." Sophie's eyes widened. "The billionaire guy?" "No way," Emma nodded. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to hear him out, but part of me hates him for leaving us." Sophie, surprisingly, offered advice. "Maybe he messed up, but people change. If he's trying, doesn't he deserve a chance?" Emma mulled over Sophie's words. Could she really give Michael a chance? Their strained relationship took an unexpected turn when Sophie went missing. Emma was frantic, searching the streets and calling every contact she had. When Michael found out, he immediately offered his help. Using his resources, Michael tracked Sophie to an abandoned building where she had sought shelter. Together, Michael and Emma brought Sophie back to safety, the experience forcing them to work as a team. In the aftermath, Emma saw a different side of Michael. His determination to help Sophie reminded her of the father she once knew. For the first time, she considered the possibility that he had changed. The quiet hum of the shelter's dining hall had faded into the night. Michael Reynolds sat across from Emma in a small, dimly lit conference room, his hands clasped tightly. On the table between them lay the photograph Emma had found, an image from a lifetime ago of a father and daughter smiling on a sunny afternoon. Emma's arms were crossed, her face a mask of cold detachment, though her trembling fingers betrayed the storm of emotions raging beneath the surface. "You've had years to find me," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "Why now? Why show up out of nowhere and pretend you care?" Michael met her gaze, his eyes red with unshed tears. "Emma, I've been looking for you for years," he said softly. "I never stopped. Every lead, every investigator. It always ended in nothing. But I never gave up." Emma's lips tightened into a thin line. "Convenient," she said bitterly. "While I was being bounced around from one foster home to another, you were probably sitting in some boardroom, signing million-dollar deals." "That's not true." Michael's voice cracked, his desperation spilling out. "I made mistakes. I let my work consume me. I thought if I built something big enough, you and your mother would see it was all for you. But I was wrong, Emma. I was so wrong." Emma stood abruptly, pacing the room, her fists clenched at her sides as she tried to keep her voice steady. "You weren't just wrong, Michael. You abandoned us. You abandoned me. And when Mom died, I was alone. Do you know what that feels like? To have no one?" Michael stood as well, his heart breaking with every word. "I didn't know," he said, his voice trembling. "By the time I found out about Sarah, you were gone, lost in a system I didn't understand. I should have done more. I should have fought harder. I failed you, Emma. I failed you, and I will never forgive myself for that." For a long moment, Emma said nothing. She turned her back to him, staring out the window into the dark city streets. "You think saying sorry will fix everything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you can just show up and make it all okay?" "No," Michael said, his tone heavy with regret. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to prove that I've changed. to show you that I'm not the man who let you down." Before Emma could respond, a staff member burst into the room, their face pale with worry. "Emma, we have a problem. Sophie is missing." Emma's heart dropped. Sophie had been struggling for weeks, but Emma thought she was finally starting to trust her. "Where was she last seen?" she asked urgently, already grabbing her coat. "The old bus depot downtown," the staff member said. Michael stepped forward. "Let me help," he said firmly. Emma hesitated for a brief moment before nodding. Together, they hurried to Michael's car and drove through the quiet, shadowy streets of the city. The tension in the car was palpable, neither of them speaking, their thoughts consumed by worry for Sophie. At the depot, they found Sophie huddled in a dark corner, her knees pulled to her chest and tears streaking her face. Emma rushed to her, dropping to her knees beside the girl. "Sophie, what's going on?" she asked gently. Sophie looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I could, but I'm so tired, Emma. I'm tired of pretending everything's okay." Michael crouched beside them, his tone soft but steady. "I know how you feel," he said, "but running away won't fix it. You've got people who care about you, Sophie. People who want to help." Sophie shook her head, her voice trembling. "How can I trust that? How do I know it won't all fall apart again?" "You don't," Emma said, placing a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "But you try anyway. You take it one day at a time. And if you fall, we'll be here to help you get back up." Sophie hesitated, her gaze flicking between Emma and Michael. Finally, she nodded, allowing them to help her to her feet. Back at the shelter, as Sophie settled into her bed, Emma found Michael sitting on a bench outside, staring into the distance. She approached slowly, the cool night air wrapping around them. "Thank you," she said quietly. Michael looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For helping with Sophie," Emma said, sitting beside him. "I didn't expect that from you." Michael smiled faintly, though his eyes remained sad. "It's the least I could do. I see so much of you in her. Your strength, your resilience." Emma looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. "I didn't feel strong back then. I felt abandoned and broken. And I blamed you for all of it." Michael's throat tightened. "I know," he said. "And you had every right to. I wasn't there when you needed me most. But I want to be here now, Emma. I want to make things right, even if it takes the rest of my life." Emma turned to him, her expression conflicted. "You really mean that, don't you?" Michael nodded. "I do." For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to believe him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The days following Sophie's return were a whirlwind at the shelter. Michael began visiting more frequently, not just to see Emma, but to contribute meaningfully to the work being done. His presence became a quiet but reassuring constant, and while Emma still kept him at arm's length, the hostility between them softened. One afternoon, Michael and Emma found themselves sorting through boxes of donated clothes in the shelter's storage room. As they worked side by side, the silence between them was companionable rather than strained. "Why did you start helping here?" Michael asked suddenly, his tone curious but not intrusive. Emma paused, holding a worn jacket in her hands. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible," she said. "When I aged out of the foster system, I didn't have anyone. No family, no safety net. The shelter saved me. If I can do that for someone else, it's worth it." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "You've built something incredible here, Emma. I can see why everyone looks up to you." Emma glanced at him, her expression softening. "It's not just me. It's the people here. The staff, the volunteers, the residents. It's a community." As they continued working, Michael hesitated before speaking again. "I want to help more," he said. "Not just donations. I want to fund programs, create scholarships, expand the shelter. Whatever it takes to make a real difference." Emma's eyes widened, her surprise evident. "You'd really do that?" "Of course," Michael said earnestly. "This isn't just about trying to make up for the past. It's about doing something that matters. You taught me that." As weeks passed, Emma began to see Michael in a new light. He wasn't the absent father she remembered, but a man trying desperately to make amends. She allowed herself to lower her walls, just slightly, and they began sharing more about their lives. One evening, Emma invited Michael to join her and Sophie for dinner at the shelter. It was a simple meal, spaghetti and salad, but the atmosphere was warm and filled with laughter. Michael told stories from his childhood, and Sophie listened intently, her usual guardedness replaced by curiosity. "You're not as boring as you look," Sophie teased, earning a laugh from both Michael and Emma. For Emma, the moment felt surreal. She hadn't felt this kind of connection in years, and while the pain of the past still lingered, she couldn't deny the comfort of having her father close. With Michael's support, the shelter underwent significant improvements. A new job training program was launched, offering residents skills in technology, hospitality, and construction. A scholarship fund was established, and Sophie became its first recipient, her dream of becoming a nurse finally within reach. Michael was hands-on throughout the process, attending planning meetings and even helping to paint the newly renovated dormitories. The staff and residents grew to admire him, and for Emma, it was impossible to ignore the impact he was making. One day, as they stood in front of the shelter's new sign, a plaque bearing the name of Emma's late mother, Sarah Reynolds, Michael turned to Emma. "Your mom would be proud of you," he said softly, "of everything you've done." Emma blinked back tears, her voice trembling. "She'd be proud of us," she replied. Months had passed since Michael began making amends. His once empty mansion had transformed into a vibrant hub of activity. Every room, once a symbol of loneliness, now carried the laughter of children and the warmth of shared meals. Emma, though hesitant at first, had found a cautious rhythm of trust with her father. The shelter had become a cornerstone of their shared purpose. Under Michael's funding and Emma's leadership, new programs flourished: a mentorship initiative for at-risk youth, a job placement service, and expanded housing for families. Every step forward was a step toward healing, for the community and for themselves. One sunny afternoon, Michael and Emma stood together at the shelter's garden. Flowers bloomed in neatly arranged beds, a project Emma had spearheaded in memory of her mother, Sarah. "She would have loved this," Michael said, his voice soft. Emma glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "She always said flowers were like people. They need care, patience, and a little sunlight to thrive." Michael nodded, his gaze on the vibrant petals. She was a wise woman. Emma hesitated before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot about her, about us." Michael turned to her, waiting. "I'm not saying I can forget everything," Emma continued, her voice steady. "But I see you trying, and that means more than I thought it would." Michael's throat tightened. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's all I could ever hope for." As the sun set, Emma and Michael prepared for a community dinner. The dining hall, decorated with photos of the shelter's residents and their achievements, buzzed with energy. Sophie, now thriving in her nursing program, took charge of the seating arrangements, her confidence shining. Emma watched her, a small smile playing on her lips. "She's going to do great things," she said to Michael. "She has a great role model," Michael replied, his tone filled with pride. The dinner was a celebration not just of progress but of the people who made it possible. When Michael stood to speak, the room fell silent. "Thank you all for letting me be part of this journey," he began. "You've shown me that it's never too late to make things right, to give back, and to believe in something bigger than yourself." He turned to Emma, his voice thick with emotion. "And thank you for giving me a chance." In the final moments, Emma and Michael visited Sarah's grave. They stood together in silence, the breeze carrying the scent of lilies. Michael laid a bouquet of flowers at the headstone, his hands steady despite the emotions running through him. "She would be proud of you," Michael said softly. Emma looked at him, her eyes misty but clear. "Of us," she corrected. They stood there for a while longer, the past finally finding its place in their lives, not as a weight, but as a foundation for the future. Have you ever had a second chance to reconnect with someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more inspiring tales.